Hey everyone, this is Mauricio Abril with a picture demo to show a little bit about my design and overall artistic process. So here you can see I'm starting to make a rough sketch with basic lines. Although I'm using a kind of line-driven tool, I'm always thinking primarily about shape and overall kind of relationships of shapes to one another. So I'm looking at my proportions, I'm looking at my angles, I'm looking at my kind of contrasts of straight against curve, and all those kind of basic artistic principles. Right now I'm kind of blocking in the hair, and a quick note about this, as you'll see throughout the rest of the demo, I'm primarily using a very simple, blocky, rectangular brush that's purposefully meant to not allow me a lot of precision, because at this point in the process I'm working only on one layer because I don't want to worry about too many kind of mini steps. I want to use Photoshop for what it's good for in other ways, but I don't really want to work on too many layers at first because I just want to kind of find a nice artistic flow, and I find that working on too many layers at once, especially at the beginning, tends to kind of be a little too chaotic because I have too many options. And on top of that, I'm working with this kind of one solid brush that's for the most part not giving me a lot of flexibility in terms of precision, and that's primarily because I just want to lay down shape and tone and flat color so that I can actually make some informed decisions of my composition, my drawing, and essentially the overall process of the image that I'm making. So as you can see, I'm working on one layer right now, and now I'm using Photoshop for what it's good for in terms of like being able to rotate the entire thing, which you can never do, and obviously if you're actually working with paper or paint. So at this point, I'm essentially just going back and forth and working on my just shape design. And again, I'm working on one layer for the body, which again allows me to just kind of make it feel a little bit more organic. And ideally, I think that's what a lot of artists are doing nowadays, except for when they're actually trying to make their pieces feel very digital. But even when they are digital and aware of it, they still try to incorporate that kind of traditional aesthetic. At this point, I'm just kind of now just tweaking the shapes a little bit. As I mentioned, originally my tool was meant to kind of give me the basic shape outline, and as I'll continue the drawing, I'll just further refine those shapes. And as I work the face, I will then start to work on a new layer, simply because now that I'm working with such smaller, intricate shapes, and I'm just kind of also exploring with my drawing and design, I'm going to kind of mess up, and I don't want that to really affect the underpainting as much. And again, this is more of a Photoshop kind of a trick or technique that I embrace, because again, you can't really do this with a traditional medium, and this is one of the ways in which digital medium can actually enhance the creative process. It'll let you make mistakes that you wouldn't normally make, and it's in making those mistakes that you actually find the right solutions. So it's the errors are really good in terms of just being free to explore, not trying to be too perfect. So here I kind of roughed in a shape for the face. As you can see, I just used the underpainting as a base, but now I'm kind of filling in the underpainting to match that, and I'll just be further refining these shapes. But again, just working with that very blocky brush. Again, I'm purposely trying to restrict the amount of precision that I can do at this stage, because I don't want to be focused too much on the small little details. I want to be focused more on the bigger, more important shapes and the relationships of those shapes to one another. So I'm continuing to refine that. I'll be refine, and as you'll see, like, I'm jumping around the piece because I personally don't really believe in working something to one area and then going on to the other. Everything kind of relates to everything else in an image, so I'll lay something in and it feels right at that moment, I'll leave it alone. If I feel like we need to address it, or if I need to address it, then I'll come back to it. And oftentimes what you think is okay might actually not be. You just have to not kind of focus on it for a little while. So that's something that I'm kind of demonstrating here as well. So I'm continuing to refine the shapes. And now that I have now that I'm essentially finding the design that I want, that I kind of see in my head, but I'm also kind of exploring on the screen, then I'm able to refine the shapes further, because the way I describe it is at the beginning, I kind of use the tool that got me to about 80% of the way there. My shapes are kind of roughly defined, they're about 80% um, precise, but I'm not worried too much about the edges and the exact shape until later, until I can make a decision on exactly what kind of angle or straight or curve I want to employ, simply because I find that personally, when I'm taking something too far along at the very early stages, for instance, in this case, the head, if I'm really chiseling out her head and really making sure that I love the hair and I love the face and the cheek and everything's working, but then the rest of the body's still kind of really, really rough, I find that my drawings never turn out as good as when I'm working everything simultaneously, going back and forth and making relationships, making decisions based off of other relationships. So as you can see with the glasses and the facial features, I'm actually doing those on a separate layer, because at this point in the process, I don't need it to be on one layer. I kind of use that one layer approach to allow me to be quick and to make bold decisions and to not fuss with like the minutia of certain layers and what layers can do in Photoshop. I want to make artistic decisions at first. And now that I'm detailing in the face, I'm still approaching it the same way I approach the body. I'm using not a precise brush, but creating, shapes and lines that are about 80% of the way there. The eyebrows, the pupils, they're roughly defined, but they're not the way I'd want to leave them, and I'll work on them eventually later. I'll kind of define that. Same thing with the lips and the mouth. Here I kind of made the decision to not have it be all teeth. So, as you can see, I'm painting into the lips and on top of the lips and kind of refining those edges. And now I'm going back into the overall face and adding a little bit of color. So for me, it really helps to not take one area to a high level of finish right away. And again, that's personal. There are as many ways to paint as there are artists. So if somebody else feels that that's beneficial to them, then awesome, good for them. And it's the lesson here though is that you got to find your way. And I'm proposing, I'm showing you what I like to do, which to me helps me find the right decisions the fastest and lets the process be a little bit organic. It lets the process be fluid, and really takes the pressure off of me in a way, since I don't feel like I have to have something perfect right away. So now I'm just continuing to again refine and delineate. As you noticed, my rendering style is very close to the kind of animation aesthetic of kind of very flat, very simple values, which I'm doing for the sake of the speed of this demo, but at the same time it's also an aesthetic that I've been really enjoying. I see, I've been a fan of it since I was a kid, and kind of wanted to just play around with it, and it's something that I've been doing with my personal art lately as well. But it's also the basis of really good illustration and painting, starting off with very basic values and colors, and then building off of that. Because if you wanted to, you could take this base illustration and render it for days if you really wanted to. But as long as it maintains the integrity of these basic value and color relationships, you'll be good. So now I'm going in and refining, the eyebrows and the shapes of the pupils and the other facial features, because now it's like, okay, I got it where I wanted. Now I just have to clean it up. So just going in there, further refining, some more painting, and using the drawing layer to kind of check my I guess accuracy, or just to kind of see the relationship. And as you can see, now I'm painting back on the layer where I have to paint on top of the shoulder, but then I paint the shoulder back on top of the hair. And I actually like that because it makes the illustration, you know, feel very much more traditional, and I guess more organic than if everything was precisely cut out on its own layer. And again, that's not an invalid way to approach it, but the way I want to approach this illustration is by making it feel a lot more natural, and also having the kind of digital paint strokes blend into one another is a way to kind of achieve that. So here you'll see I'm going into the lips again, refining that, kind of essentially pushing and pulling. There's really no substitution for that. Unless you've kind of painted something, unless you have like a style that you've painted in for ages and you know exactly what to do, which in my case would be kind of boring, there's always going to be a certain amount of experimentation with your painting and putting down a stroke of color and saying, oh, is that too light or is that too dark? Is that too saturated, too desaturated? And that's essentially what I'm doing here. Decided to make the lips a little more saturated, also to kind of massage out the edges, make it a shape that I enjoy a lot more than what I had previously. Just another continuation of the refinement of the facial features. And at this point, it's really now about, you know, you've got the painting or the illustration about 80% of the way there, and because you've placed your shapes and your values in the right location, as well as you've got the right kind of relationship of value to one another, you can now just refine that. So you'll see I'm kind of working that in. And one of the cool things about Photoshop is that you can actually adjust things a little bit in a way that's not traditional. And here I'm just refining the glasses because I don't want them to be too even. Part of the appeal of the design of these glasses is that the top rim of the frame is thicker than the bottom rim, so I'll be going in and kind of refining that. As you can see, continuing that kind of refinement and just working that in, essentially massaging it. You know, you've got the drawing down for the most part, and then finishing the drawing in the kind of painting stage is just a continuation of that. At this point, I believe I'm trying to figure out the nose area a little bit, and thinking I kind of want to adjust that, so I'll lasso it and move it over and make it feel a little bit more natural for what I was hoping for in terms of the proportion of her face. And just continuing to refine the overall nose. So the idea is that the face being the focal point of really any portrait, unless you're trying to do something different artistically. In this case, I'm kind of spending the majority of my detail time on the face. And now I'm kind of adding more detail to the hair, just essentially kind of really more just design elements, kind of streaks. They could be actually dyed streaks, or they just could be light patterns. It's just to make the hair a little bit more interesting than just having it be a flat shape. And it's important to remember that anytime you add elements like that, details, design elements, they should always help complement the illustration or the form or the kind of the motifs you've set forward. So in this case, to me, those not only help show the volume of the head, but they also help reinforce that gesture of her looking to her left, to our right. And now kind of adding the final facial detail of a nose ring, which is based off of a photo that I'm looking at. So I'm essentially using that entirely as my inspiration. And at this point, because I have a lot, I don't need to always work on one layer. The whole one layer approach is meant entirely to help begin the process and prevent you from getting too lost in too many with too many choices. So of course at this stage I'll have the nose ring on a different layer, simply because then I can tweak it, change it whenever I want. And now I'm continuing to refine certain parts of the illustration that I feel need refining. And I'll be adding the kind of final kind of character piece of the patch on her shirt. And as you can see, it's I actually am excuse me, I actually am drawing this on a separate layer, but the important thing to note about this is also helping me show the perspective of her chest plate being turned away from us and angled kind of to the left. So you've got that to help the viewer orient themselves, because otherwise you just have this black mass, which is interesting as well because it plays against the other areas of detail and form. You saw me adjust the kind of streaks on her hair simply because I kind of wanted to just further refine that. I mean, at this point, refining the small shapes is an important step, because it is now, it's not about kind of, you definitely don't want to overwork something, but if you see something sticking out to you, then it's important to kind of address it. And at least something that you feel like is a hindrance to the appreciation of the piece, in which case the streaks on her hair were, to me, kind of felt a little too even, so I just kind of adjusted them. And now I realize that I don't like the fact that both of her arms are angled out of the composition. I kind of want to at least see one hand. I feel it's more interesting if you see at least one hand. So I painted out that arm, and I'm drawing in a new arm on a new layer so that I can kind of adjust that and not worry about the shapes beneath it and the colors beneath it. So I can kind of just make decisions on the arm by itself, because I now know I like everything else. So here I'm just kind of, again, thinking in the overall shape, and also thinking kind of the direction of the arm, because now that I've got like my composition essentially 90% done, the arm is very important, because how it relates to the angle of the body as well as the edges of the frame are important. So I kind of want this arm to maybe be, angled up, bent at the elbow, while the other arm is more down and extended. And so now I'm just refining the finger shapes that I kind of set for myself, because at this point you really can't let it be too mushy, too ambiguous, especially a hand. A hand is really crucial, and the way I look at it is that anybody can know if a hand is kind of off, because we all have them, and so you definitely want to make sure your hands feel and look natural. And again, using Photoshop for what it's good for. So moving the hand around, kind of rotating the arm. And the last thing I'll be doing is adding kind of a color background, because I thought I wanted it to be white, but I kind of felt like adding a color would be good. So here I am just laying in this blue pastel tone. And this is the kind of completion of the demo. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope to do many more.